Hello and welcome to today's Policy and Practice webinar. My name is Janet Harkin and I'm delighted to welcome so many of you here today. This webinar is titled Minimising the Impact of the Lower Benefit Cap. Now, before I introduce you to our speakers, I'd just like to do a little bit of housekeeping, if I may. Just to get you into what we're talking about today, I'd just like to introduce you to the panel on the right-hand side by doing an audio check, if I may. If I could ask you to look at the panel on the right-hand side and raise your digital hand to me to give me a little wave. And while you're doing that, just to say as well that we do like to have questions throughout, and you can also ask the questions in the panel on the right-hand side as well. We have time at the end for lots of questions, so please do put the questions in as and when they come to you. We will have polls throughout, 3 polls, and a survey at the end of the webinar. And we've also got a handout available on the right-hand side for you to download whenever you like. It's just a handout about policy and practice, about us as an organisation. We aim to finish by 11:30 and have you on your way. So thank you very much for raising your hand. It's great to hear that you can hear us. So today's speakers, without further ado, in a moment I shall be handing you over to Deven Ghelani from Policy and Practice, and Deven will be joined by my colleague Giovanni Tonutti from Policy and Practice. But we're delighted to welcome a special guest with us today, Asha Vyas, who is Head of Enablement and Welfare from London Borough of Croydon, and Asha will be talking in the webinar as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to now hand over to Deven, and he's going to take you through the agenda and the rest of the webinar.
Great. Thank you, Janet, and thank you to all of those attending. It's great to have. There's been such interest in this webinar, and I do hope you get some really good value out of it. Do ask any questions you want to as you go through, and we'll try and make sure we cover all of them, or at least as many as we can at the end. What I thought I'd walk you through very briefly to start off with, for those of you, there's a lot of new people on this webinar, so I'd walk you through a brief introduction to policy and practice, who we are, what we're doing. The focus today is obviously the benefit cap and specifically some of the work that we've been doing in Croydon. I thought it'd be helpful to contextualize the benefit cap by giving a brief history of that as a policy, but also from the local authority perspective, how they've been able to receive different bits of information at different times, and perhaps more generally, how different authorities are learning about the cap today. Then I thought it'd be useful I'll hand over to Giovanni, and he'll be talking through some work he's been doing with the London Borough of Croydon, specifically, helping them to identify different types of households that are affected by the lower benefit cap, and helping therefore to determine what support is likely to be most effective when reaching out to those groups. So I'll hand over to Giovanni at that point. Then afterwards, we'll have Asha, who is Head of Enablement and Welfare at Croydon Council, to say a few words about how useful they found that, and perhaps add some more detail around the work they're doing with those capped households. And I'll finish up with a recap before moving on to questions and answers. We'll certainly be ready. We finish well within the hour, so you'll be able to move forward. So I set up Policy and Practice about 4 years ago, fundamentally to try and make the welfare system simple for people and organisations to understand. It's an incredibly confusing system, one that I've experienced myself, and I think it's really important to put this information in the hands of people who are affected by the benefit system, so they can see what happens if they're making positive decisions like moving into work. And I'll show you a bit about that toward the end of the webinar. We work across 3 main areas: software, consultancy, and policy. And really, it's the policy that's at the heart of what we do. So we model the current benefit system and universal credit in its entirety through our software, but it's the policy knowledge that allows us to do that. It's also important from a policy perspective that our work has a national impact. So we can do that through the software, through our analysis, which can be scaled across local authorities really quickly, but also through webinars like this, where we can share what we've identified as being good practice, really interesting insights. And I just encourage you all to get in touch with us, hello@policyandpractice.co.uk. If there's something particularly powerful that you think you're doing, I'd personally love to hear about it, and perhaps we can share it in a future webinar with others across the UK filling similar roles. This next slide is a roadmap of welfare reform all the way through to 2020. The areas in green are mainly tax and living wage changes that are having a positive impact on people's incomes, whereas the red, of which there's significantly more, is having a negative impact on people's incomes. Now, today we're going to be focusing down here in the bottom left on the benefit cap, but it's important to recognise that this is one of many reforms that are going to be affecting households across the UK. And I think some of the principles that we are applying here can be applied to other reforms as well. So, for example, being able to identify in advance which households on universal credit will be better off versus those households that are likely to need transitional protection and potentially ultimately be worse off under universal credit. You might want to target your engagement to those two groups quite differently. So what we're about to talk about in the context of the benefit cap today can be applied to other reforms. It's also important to understand that the interaction of these different policies has an important effect. So increases in the personal allowance, increases in the living wage have knock-on impacts on housing benefit that are important. Things like the two-child rule, the introduction of the two-child rule within tax credits, where you're unlikely to be able to receive support for a third child born after next April. That may also have a knock-on impact on the benefit cap in the future, because you won't be receiving child tax credit for those children, for example. So it's important to understand how all of these policies interact, and that's how we do our work. So we model all of these policies combined when we're looking at the impact of welfare reform, any particular welfare reform on any particular and specific household. So that's fundamentally the difference, I think, in some of the analyses you'll have seen in the news about the benefit cap and perhaps the work that we've done for Croydon. So they tend to look at the impact of one policy on many people. We've got the headline figures from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and the Chartered Institute of Housing had some good coverage yesterday talking about the impact that this one particular policy was going to have on many people. Our approach is quite different. We look at the impact of all policies combined on one person, and we think that's really powerful when you're thinking about how you're going to engage that individual, or you want to work with them, you want to support them. It's really important to understand what all of these policies combined means for them, because they're not necessarily that interested in news about the benefit cap or news about universal credit, but they do care fundamentally about the pound in their pocket, and you need to know how all policies combined are going to affect that. So that's the approach that we've taken in Croydon. I'm going to kick off with, as we move on to the benefit cap, a poll. So I'm just going to launch the poll. It'd be helpful for us to know before we start what action you've been able to take so far in preparing yourselves for the benefit cap. So the poll should be up now. Select one or more of the following. Janet, can you confirm that that's working? Yeah, I'm seeing some responses come through.
Yeah, so the poll is, what action have you taken so far? So number one, we've got the October-November benefit cap scan from DWP. We've contacted currently capped households. We've contacted newly capped households. We've prioritised our DHP spending, or we're not doing enough, or we don't know. Don't know what activity we've taken so far.
Great, thanks for that, Janet. And we've got just over 2/3 voted. When we get to 80%, I'll close the poll. Okay, that's great. I'll close the poll now and we can have a look at the results. Okay, so 68% have got the October-November benefit cap scan. That still leaves 1/3 of those on the webinar that haven't. 56% have already begun to contact currently capped households. That's good to hear. I think that's very positive. And all of those have obviously been contacting those currently capped households, but they've also been contacting those newly capped households as well. They've been prioritising their DHP spending. Well, just under 1/3 have been prioritising their DHP spending. So that might be useful for them to learn a bit more about that. And a similar number don't necessarily feel like they're doing enough, and perhaps hopefully you can learn more about that in this presentation today. Thanks all those for you for completing the poll. Now I thought I'd say a little bit about the lower benefit cap, the single biggest challenge posed by welfare reform to date. Now that's a challenging statement. I think it's certainly had the biggest impact in terms of the media, in terms of people's awareness, and also perhaps the biggest challenge from a local authority perspective, because it can have a really big impact on their bottom line. There are other reforms that incrementally, like the benefit freeze, that from a pound in people's pocket perspective is having a bigger effect. Brief history. So it's a policy that was designed to limit the amount that of benefits that any single household can receive. Initially, it was set at what was at the time the median wage of working households in September 2013 at £26,000. That's been lowered to, I think the argument goes that that was in gross terms, that £26,000 was more like 35. So there was an argument that it could be lowered. It's important as well to recognise it was an incredibly popular policy. So that's just something to bear in mind when we think about this policy. There was definitely a political driver there when talking about it. And that's another reason why I think it's had more headlines than perhaps other more impactful reforms. So the lower benefit cap of £20,000 across the UK, except for London, and £23,000 in London, will affect households, will be affecting currently capped households already. So it came into effect yesterday. And then over the next 13 weeks, by the end of January, all newly affected households will also be capped. Has a significant impact on people's pockets, significant impact on low-income residents, and also on the local authorities that are supporting them. So who's affected? We'll be talking a bit about how we can help you to understand that locally. But our analysis finds that across the UK, 5 times as many households will be impacted by the lower benefit cap. You can see this is the impact today. It's only London that's red and most significantly impacted. Whereas, again, you can see that in the future, many parts of the UK are certainly a much darker shade. So many more households will be affected. Towns and cities outside of London are particularly affected. So we've done this analysis for over 30 local authorities across the UK. You can see in London, 3 times as many households are being affected from originally quite a high base. In big cities, the impact is even greater. So many times more households are likely to be affected in places like Birmingham or Leeds or Manchester. But perhaps the biggest effect will be on small cities and towns, where the kind of incremental impact is that much greater, up to 10 times as many households affected from the analyses we've done for some of those smaller district authorities. And the information available about the benefit cap to capped households, but also to the local authorities that are there supporting them, has been quite fluid. So DWP listed those households, created lists of affected households in 2013. Feedback from the local authorities we've been working with is that at that time they tended to overestimate the number of capped households, missing out a number of exemptions. And local authorities found that they were doing a lot of that analysis themselves to identify who those exempted households were and learning a lot more about those households. One lesson that was very clear when speaking with frontline advisors at the time was they were struck by the level of need of those households that were coming in. And perhaps one positive to take away from perhaps the introduction of the benefit cap is that these households were now for the first time receiving that additional support from the department, from the DWP, and also from local authorities. Now, that methodology for identifying capped households appears to have improved. It's based on something called the WPLS, or Work and Pensions Longitudinal Survey. This is a data set that joins administrative data across DWP, Housing Benefit, and HMRC. So it ought to be reasonably accurate. DWP released their initial scan data in May, June, with a second scan in October that removed some exempted households. It's important that sometimes the data sets are released on the basis of Job Centre Plus boundaries to local authorities, and I think that's led to some confusion from time to time. So you need to make sure that you've got, again, we just had this conversation with Croydon this morning, you've got the data from DWP for all of those Job Centre Plus districts that might have residents in your area, because otherwise you would be missing out on some affected households. Households affected at 26k have already had the cap lowered. we're rolling out across the next 13 weeks, with London and larger cities impacted later. So it'll be affecting those smaller districts first. You probably have an earlier, perhaps a pre-Christmas rollout date. So the timing there obviously not great, either for the local authorities, but particularly for those households affected. Letters to claimants say they may be affected and that their local authority will be in touch. So it's good to hear that some of you have been in touch. I know from speaking to journalists that that hasn't necessarily always been the case, and being as proactive about this as possible is I think important. So the earlier you can let them know that they're able to reach out, the more likely they are to get the support they need before they start to fall into arrears or be affected by the drop in their housing benefit. We find generally that even if you do know, even if you are reaching out, many households are unaware of what this means for them. And hopefully what we'll be talking to you about is what you can do next, and how local authorities that are struggling to engage people today might be more successful in the future. So that's a brief overview of the benefit cap. Without coherent strategy, the impact is going to be severe. The things that local authorities are particularly concerned about from families and child poverty perspective is the risk of eviction and homelessness. Specifically as well, local authorities are, particularly those in London, but also those outside, is the impact that this is going to have on the temporary accommodation costs, whereas the local authority's responsibility to bridge the gap between housing benefit and rents. Now, there are discretionary housing payments available for that, but what we find is when you take the cumulative impact of welfare reform, including things like under-occupation and other changes into account, the level of DHP it's going to be nowhere near sufficient to support all of those households. So it's important to prioritise support. So, for example, here, £415 per week per capped household in temporary accommodation in Croydon is a significant amount to be spending. And there's a real question there possibly around false economy, and how you can get support to help individuals no longer be affected by the cap. Similarly, it has a knock-on effect on housing associations. So we work with a number of authorities that have close partnerships with their housing association partners, possibly those working with arm's length management associations, or those that have their own stock. And they've been using this data to, again, be proactive in how they target support, so that they can mitigate the impact on rent arrears and evictions later on down the line. Sorry, I'm not sure there's some builds into this. So, case study, London Borough Croydon. It's helpful to, before I hand over to Giovanni to talk about the work he's been doing with them. When we kicked off the project, the fundamental strategic priorities for the council are to keep people in their home, to overall improve household resilience and well-being, and to ultimately reduce indebtedness. Now, this work on the benefit cap is one part of that I think is very timely right now, but they're taking a broader impact towards supporting all households on low incomes, particularly those affected by welfare reform, but also those that may not be, but are struggling with arrears or struggling with other challenges. And they want to take a proactive approach to supporting those households through the smart use of data. As I mentioned, Asha will be speaking a bit later, where you'll be able to learn a bit more about their benefit cap strategy team and the work that they've been doing. I thought it'd be worthwhile sharing this quote from Mark Fowler in kicking off the project. We've been working with them for about 4 or 5 months now, and he was kind enough to share this with us. So he said that working with policy and practice, we've been able to develop information that supports, informs, and helps us monitor the effectiveness of our strategies. By better understanding the levels of risk and the concentrated areas where those residents live, as well as those individual households affected, we believe resources from inside and outside of the council will be better targeted and more effective. We're deeply concerned about the amounts families will be losing, and without a proactive, preventative approach, we fear for the longer-term impact on residents. So clearly concerns there, but actually recognising that they are able to do something about it through better understanding how those households are affected by these reforms. So being quite constructive, I think, in their engagement. Before I hand over to Giovanni again, there's a second poll. What are the biggest challenges you face when working with capped households? I'll just launch that poll now. So you should see that pop up. What are the biggest challenges you face when working with capped households? Identifying those individual households affected. Understanding how individual households are affected. Engaging with those households. not having sufficient support. And it would have been nice to have broken that down into employment support resource and perhaps financial resources, like DHPs, or any other challenges, don't know. So half of you have voted so far, so it'd be helpful if others could join in. Some quite interesting results here, particularly around the biggest challenges. I can already see a few that are particularly striking. Okay, just one more minute. Well, not that long. We've had 1 minute, so I'll close the poll now. Thank you very much. And I'll share those results. So it's interesting to see, and I'm not surprised, we had an event here at our offices recently where engaging with those households that were affected was one of the biggest challenges. So I'll try and spend a bit more time toward the end of this talking about how Croydon are doing that. Identifying the individual households affected is low, perhaps because you've already got those benefit cap scans. But understanding how they're affected, I think there is a bit more that you feel you could do about that. And the size of the support budgets available is obviously a big issue as well. So whether or not you're going to have the resources over the longer term. But understanding how individual households are affected, I think there is possible to have a richer understanding of that. And that's something that Giovanni is going to talk about. So over to you, Giovanni.
Yeah. Thank you, Deven. And thank you all for attending. It's good to see so many of you on the webinar. Just a quick introduction. I work as an analyst at Policy in Practice. And in the context of the work we've done for Croydon, I've been working in close partnership with the local benefit cap strategy team. And it's a back and forth relationship. And I've been particularly supporting their strategical and operational decision-making by providing evidence based on data analysis. So before I dive into the findings of the analysis of the households that are kept in different groups that we identified, I thought it would be useful to just go over and give an overview of the data sets and the process in place for us to carry out this analysis. Croydon Council has shared with us their housing benefit and council tax support data sets. I like to call these two data sets as really gold mines of information because they really contain an awful lot of indicators about your low-income residents and more importantly, crucially, at the household level. And we then layered on top of this information that the council had received from the DWP, the DWP scans, and information on DHP awards, council tax payments and arrears, and housing benefit overpayments. And especially, this last three data sets really contributed to give a more comprehensive picture of the financial situation and also the type of support that each of these households have received so far from the council. We combine the insight that this data provides with our analytical capability and with our modeling software, the Universal Benefit and Budgeting software. And we were able to identify the households that are affected by the cap, but most importantly, we were able to sketch really detailed profile about the financial and other circumstances of each single individual. And in doing this, work, while I was working on this data, I came up with the definition of 6 broad target groups that would help the Croydon team really prioritize and deliver support more effectively. And I think we'll hear from Asha, but I think the council have found that useful. Households and families were grouped in one of these 6 groups according to specific characteristics of each household, or also according to the specific intervention that the council could and can plan and deliver for each of these groups. So you can see here we have 6 groups, 168. These are the numbers referring to the Croydon cohort. 168 potential exemptions, 227 houses that are already capped, 227 what we call quick wins, houses that are in work or close to the employment world, 81 houses in temporary accommodation, 115 lone parents, and 77 households potentially earn universal credit. So let's start with the first group, potential exemption. So we triangulated the DWP scan with other information on the Shibi and our own analysis that our software is able to generate. And we identified 168 cases that could identified as capped by the DWP, but that could potentially qualify for an exemption. So these cases range from claimants claiming carer's allowance or DLA, or claimants in the ESA support group. And this is due to changes in the methodology that the DWP has done between one scan and another, and it might also be due to the fact that we use the more up-to-date Shibi extract than the DWP, and we identified these cases. But there's also very interesting, a large group of households that work enough hours to qualify for working tax credit. So perhaps they're not taking up the benefit, so they're not exempted from the cap, but they could. And identifying these households preemptively would save them a lot of financial hardship. So the key takeaway point here is for local authorities to verify this exemption before making any type of contact. This for two main reasons. The first one is that this would avoid undue stress to households. So if we make sure that they're qualified for an exemption before communicating that they would be capped, it would be good to them. And the second, by identifying this exemption, would reduce the caseload of household cap your team has to work with, and you could target resources more effectively. The second group of households that are already capped, as of yesterday, households that were capped at the higher threshold of 26,000 are now capped officially. And this is the first group to be capped. It's interesting that speaking with Croydon and the benefit cap team, they said many of these households might have not sought for support from the council so far because they simply managed their housing benefit reduction from the first cap by budgeting or taking up a few hours of work. However, a further reduction in their housing benefit, it's likely to be impossible to sustain for this family without support, for example, from DHPs. So the takeaway point here is contacting these families, of course, is the priority. This is the group that will be affected first. And there are different ways, and Deven will go through how to engage with them effectively. The third group are the quick wins. What we call quick wins are those households that are either already in work and they are capped, or households that are not far from the employment work, so with low barriers to work. In Croydon, there were 168 households that were working. If these households were to increase their hours work, they could reach the working tax credit threshold and therefore be exempted. And similarly, there were other 67 households not currently working, but who show low barriers to work. So no disability, no caring responsibilities, and no young children. The takeaway point is to really target the employment support to these households, as in fact the wins could be quick and significant financial hardship could be avoided. Let's go over to the fourth group. These are households in temporary accommodation. In the borough, there were 81 temporary accommodation households that will be affected by the cap. A few of them actually lived outside of the borough, so a different strategy also to reach out to these households needs to be devised. And the cost implication of the cap, of the effect of the cap on these households are considerable. Deven briefly spoke about how much Croydon has to cover on average between the housing benefit amount and the rent, the liable rent of houses in temporary accommodation. And we estimate that the cost of the authority would rise to 1.1 million in Croydon, just for temporary accommodation households affected by the cap. So prioritizing the DHPs, which can in a way mitigate the costs implication on these households, it's probably the key takeaway point for this group. The fifth group we identified were households, the lone parent households with children under 5. The caring responsibility with the children represent a very, very high barriers to work for these households, of course. I think the strategy here, and we discussed this with Croydon, with the benefit cap strategy team, is to should focus on removing those barriers to work, namely by ensuring access to childcare. This can be tricky, but for example, a good way to start is to really map out where these lone parents live within the borough, understand which neighborhoods this family live, and ensuring that the childcare facilities in the neighborhoods have sufficient capacity to accommodate these children. And finally, there's a group of households that could be on universal credit. Why do I say it could be? Because, for example, in Croydon, we identified 77 households within the DWP scan that were not in the housing benefit data. So it could be that this household may have moved to another authority or are no longer impacted by the cap, but most likely these houses are on universal credit. So we know that universal credit data is not held by the local authority anymore. And without this data, it becomes clear that planning and delivering targeted support to these households is a whole other challenge. We are working with Croydon in trying to obtain the data on the UC awards, and Croydon has requested that from the DWP, but we know that sometimes it's a bit tricky to get access to the data. And there's a point here to be made about really the local authorities and the DWP sharing this information and working together to identify these affected households and really deliver a realistic system of support. So I'm delighted now to give the floor to Asha Vyas, who has worked with me, and she's the head of Enablement of Croydon. Let's see if Deven, we can...
Okay, Asha, are you there? I'll just see if I can make you a presenter. So that's connected to audio. Hi, Asha. Over to you. I think we're having a couple of audio issues right now. We're going to try and see what we can do to get her back on. In the meantime, I think I'll move forward so I'll move forward and carry on. And once we have Asha, perhaps she can jump in during the Q&A. So on to another poll. That gives us a bit of time to sort out the audio issues. It'd be helpful to know, Giovanni's just gone through identifying some of the challenges that different groups of households affected by the lower benefit cap will face. Our third poll is to identify what you think the biggest challenges are when you're supporting your capped households. So I've just launched the poll. What are the biggest challenges your residents who are going to be affected by the new lower benefit cap? What are the biggest challenges that you imagine they'll face, or for those that are capped already, what are the challenges that you're seeing when you're trying to support them? Select one or more of the following. Households that are living with a mental health condition. So we've had a lot of households that have been identified perhaps who are on GSA, who have perhaps a low level but an employment limiting mental health condition. It's quite actually hard for them to move into work. Those that are living with some other sickness or disability. So households in the ESA support group are protected from the benefit cap, but households in the work-related activity group aren't. And there are a group there that perhaps where that sickness or disability is sufficient challenge to prevent or to make it particularly difficult to support those households into work. Is it the availability of childcare? Is it general employability skills? Is it the availability of jobs? So I'm going to close the poll there. Thanks. Actually, there's a couple more people who might be waiting to vote. It looks like it's just going up still. So I'll give you 10 seconds longer. Okay. And I'll be able to share those results with you. Okay, so quite an even spread. So these are the general challenges we've identified that we've identified anecdotally is being backed up by the survey results. Availability of childcare and general employability skills quite high. Whether or not they're living with a mental health condition or some other health condition is a bit of an issue. And the availability of jobs as well is perhaps less of an issue. It's actually much more about the households themselves. I'm going to carry on. I'm just going to mention, Asha, if you can hear us and you want to have another go at jumping on, just type a chat message to me or send me a text and I'll see what we can do to get you on. In the meantime, we'll move forward. What I thought I'd do is just recap generally on everything that you've learned today, and then talk a bit more about how you might engage those households that are affected. So Giovanni talked a bit about how we've taken different data sets from Croydon, and in particular, a broader set of understanding perhaps where the money's going, as well as their levels of income from housing benefit and earnings. Through that, we've been able to model using our software the cumulative impact of welfare reform on each one of those individual households, so you can see how each household is affected. And then we've been able to show the full impact of all of these welfare reforms combined, and focusing specifically on the benefit cap as well, what impact that's having on residents. What that might enable you to do, and what it's enabled Croydon to do, is to prioritise those households that are capped. So these are two charts that Croydon received. You can see here the weekly housing benefit reduction and the number of households. So there's about 252 households here that are seeing a benefit reduction of over £100 per week. So you might want to prioritise and target your support here. But what kind of support should you target to those different households? So these are households that have low, medium and high barriers to work. So you might target employment support to this group that have low identified barriers to work, and see how effective you are at working with those first, the quick wins, as Giovanni was saying. And you might want to prioritise your DHP spend here, because it's much going to be a bigger challenge to support these particular households that have high barriers into work. So you can start to prioritise support and also determine what support is likely to be most effective. Then you can identify who they are, and that's really powerful. So this is some work that we've just been developing with Croydon, where they've been able to right-click and pull off 146 cases here. So that's a subset of one group of these 227 households that are affected, in this case by the lower benefit cap. You can pinpoint support to particular groups, so you can see how individual households are affected. And you can also see, we're doing this analysis, which is a long-term partnership with Croydon. So we can identify those households that perhaps are going to see how effective that support has been. So this is a mocked up slide, but what we'd hope to see is that, well, through that support, perhaps next week, from going from 227 households initially, that might fall to 212. That's a drop in 15 households you've been able to support. One of the biggest challenges you'd identified households face is engaging them. One of the things we found to be particularly effective, we did this work initially with Lewisham. In actual fact, that was the first piece of work we did as policy in practice to help households affected by the benefit cap back in 2013. One thing that was particularly effective was how you contacted, how you reached out to them. Sending a different type of letter was particularly powerful. Avoiding the brown envelope, adding a short personalised note, their name, perhaps the name of the advisor they could contact, handwritten, was powerful, and that was deliverable because of the low number of households that you were working with. The third thing that was particularly effective was advisors didn't have a huge amount of time to work with these households, and they were struggling to really comprehend what this meant for them. So what we did there, I'll just jump out briefly and show you this. This is a live system, so this is real. Households affected by the benefit cap. Asha will join me just after this. She's just messaged me. Thanks for that, Asha. This is a short example of a capped case. You can see here that they are capped. If they move into work 24 hours, it's a couple case. You can see all of these alerts that pop up. You may be affected by the benefit cap. You may be entitled to free school meals. And this will generate a chart. This is generated live that says this is the amount of support you were receiving. This is how that support will fall as the benefit cap is lowered. So this is a newly capped household. But if they were to move into work, they could receive significantly more through working tax credit, through other support as well. This is another version of a similar case. Now this is a system that, through visually engaging them in that short space of time, as I was able to show you can do, you can really get them to understand that, well, if I do nothing, this is what's going to happen to my income. But if I work with you and take support into work, I can actually be better off. And helping them to see that and that you're there to help them really helps the engagement with those households. Asha, are you there? I think I may have unmuted you now. Okay. Asha, if you right-click on the microphone on the right-hand side of the screen, you might be able to unmute yourself. We'll see. Evaluating the effectiveness of support is important as well. So I think I talked about that before. So watching that 227 go down to a lower number is important. And being aware of the return on investment of all of the effort you're putting into supporting these households is key as well. So there are 81 households in temporary accommodation. We've identified 212 of those households that are at high or at severe risk of eviction. We've been able to do that by comparing income against housing benefit expenditure. Now, if those 212 households at high or severe risk of eviction were to then be moved out into temporary accommodation, the average across London is £3,530 per year. That's the average cost to the council of having to bridge that gap between housing benefit and temporary accommodation costs. We'd argue this is very conservative. It's already higher for capped cases. In Croydon, as you've seen, £415 per week is somewhere between £15,000 and £20,000 per year, rather than £3.5. If they were to go through a homelessness application at the same time, that would add to those costs by an additional £8,000. But if you just take that conservative figure of £3,530 per week, then well, actually, that's a potential cost of £750,000, £750,000. That's at risk. Now, what can you then do about that? Well, identifying 168 potential exemptions out of those newly capped cases and 227 potential quick wins is a start, and I think quite an important one. And then evaluating how effective that support that you're giving them has been is going to be important too. And we're going to be doing that on an ongoing basis with Croydon, because the cap is not just a one-time thing. I think some of these households are going to need ongoing support. Asha, I can see from my screen that you may be here. So before we move on to...
Deven, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. And I think everyone else can as well. Thank you, Asha, and well done for joining us. I know it's tricky when you're based at a council and trying to get online onto these online things.
Yeah, poor Jaden, we have been trying for 10 minutes. Never mind. Right, hello everybody.
They can hear you. They won't be able to say anything back. So, yeah.
Okay, so...
Go on.
Am I okay to kick off, Deven?
Yeah, please do. We'd love to hear your experience of working with us and working in particular with capped households.
Excellent, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Asha. I work in Croydon, and we have the pleasure of having our benefit customers being capped once again by the DWP, or the central government, should I say, and then a further cap from the 7th of December. So just to give you a couple of highlights, which haven't been mentioned by Giovanni or Deven yet. We were only informed on Friday by the DWP that we have approximately 207 universal credit claims in Croydon that have been benefit capped for the very first time in the November's batch, which was a bit of a shocker for us because we were expecting the numbers to be in the 70s or 80s. So if you get any such news, please don't be shocked and fall off the chair like I did, and then trying to get all your financial implications looked at for those claimants as well. But just to give you a very quick brief, what policy in practice and our work has allowed us to do is to actually have our financial and our resource planning in a much better space this time round, not only because the customers have been capped already, but our experiences previously have shown that these customers have been through the budgeting support already with Croydon. We are already supporting some of them through discretionary housing payments. We've already put some of our customers into training courses or long-term visualization, in the sense if they've got a 4-year-old child, we know the child is going to be 5 very soon, are going to be at school. Is there anything more we can do to get them trained and upskilled to be ready for the employment market? So just a few highlights very, very quickly. What policy and practice allowed us to do was to do some segmentation of our customers, which wouldn't have been possible by us alone if we were to just look at our SHEBI and our council tax data. So what we did was we gave our rent arrears data from our housing system, we gave our SHEBI data, we gave whatever universal credit data we had to policy and practice as well. And what it allowed us to do is to do comparisons of those with what the take-home income was for these customers versus what the cost of living was and what their rent arrears and council tax arrears was. Because this gave us a good trigger of what our customer focus should be on. So just to give you one example, our welfare rights team currently are looking at around 239 customers who we believe are working, but are either not working enough or are working enough and not claiming working tax credit. And our officers are doing better by calculations for these customers to see, are they going to be better off coming off the cap and claiming universal credit, because don't forget there is still a 6-week lapse on those, or are they actually better off being capped? Now, all the results so far have proven that it is better to come off the cap and claim universal credit. There is a bit of a caveat. If the customer is receiving child tax credit and is only going to claim working tax credit for the first time, they do not trigger a universal credit claim. So please bear that in mind when you're looking at your customers. The other thing which it allowed us to do very, very quickly was to cost if those customers who are either currently in arrears already or may fall in arrears because either they're not job ready or they're not ready to move because of their circumstances, how much that would cost the local authority in order to either get them ready for employment, or if they're not even job ready, what is it actually going to be as a financial implication for the council? And in Croydon, every EATA on an average costs us around 7,500 for every placement in a year. Now, that could mean somebody who's been there only for 3 weeks, that could be somebody who's been in there for more than 6 weeks, or almost a year. So on an average, it's around 7,500. And we have 900 customers who are currently in EATA accommodation in Croydon, out of which we believe there are at least 81 who are being capped currently, who will be further capped. And these customers are the ones that we are potentially helping the most because of our statutory requirements. But those 81 customers are also being looked at for work readiness, budgeting again, and is there anything different we can do with them? For instance, one of the barriers that we found was for parents, lone parents especially, was free childcare. And with the children's services, we have offered free childcare to a lot of these customers with the best start and sure start work that some of it is going on in Croydon. The other thing which we've done is we're getting customers in for appointments, not only offering them budgeting, but actually monitoring them on CRM to see, is there anything different that they are doing in form of arrears? Are they falling behind with their council tax? Are they falling behind with their rent? And we've been doing that since the last benefit cap. So for us, this is business as usual. The only thing is obviously this time the numbers are much, much greater for us. The other thing which we found really interesting from policy and practice was majority of our customers who are being capped this time round had very little housing benefit overpayment or council tax arrears, which gave us the impression that, you know, people were managing their finances okay as far as possible. But what we also found is in that same cohort, we've got around 200 customers who've got rent arrears. So they may not have an overpayment or council tax debt, but they do have rent arrears, which are not significant. They're less than £1,000, but they are triggers that they are not making constant payments to us. So we're doing some light touch work with those customers as well. There is a lot of segmentation. For example, we've got customers we've identified who are on ESA, and we're looking at if the support component was there, will they qualify for PIP, another way of getting them out of the cap. So we've started that work already. And the geographical distribution ward-wise, which was another interesting thing. So we've got a few wards in Croydon which are highly populated with benefit cap customers. So we've done some targeted interventions there, which has allowed us to kind of engage in a much wider way with those customers. You know, we've got people like Asda or Sainsbury's involved, we've got banks involved, we've got a credit union involved in giving the right advice to those customers. And just through our Croydon work or our employment program within the service, we've already identified 90 jobs for these customers. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we hadn't segmented the data the way we have. And what was interesting was not just looking at Chibi or arrears, but also looking at how much is the cost of living in our area versus the income that somebody receives. And we've got around 239 customers who we believe are in the high and severe category who will need some support from us, whether it be financial or whether it be just helping them along. So overall, I think segmentation of customers definitely helps. It helps you to identify your financial position of how you can help these customers with the amount of limited resource you have financially. We're lucky in Croydon that we still are carrying on with our discretionary scheme on Croydon. We've got around 300k being kept aside, 3k kept aside to kind of not only just look at the BenCap customers, but to match that with employment. And the other thing we've got is what we call the map of doom, which is a map which we have created, which says any customer who's capped cannot afford to live in all these parts of London, and the only opportunity with the amount of income you receive is to go and live somewhere else. So we've done that as well to give customers a reality check that if you want to carry on living in Croydon, your only opportunity you have is to take on employment and actually do something different with your life. Anything else, Giovanni, you want me to, you think I've forgotten? I think I've covered everything. That was my my rant, should I say. No, it wasn't my rant, it was my little bit of what Croydon's experience has been so far.
Yeah. Asha, that was fantastic. Can you hear me okay? Just checking.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
I mean, it's fantastic. And I think you really brought the analysis to life, and particularly the ways in which you've been able to use it. And I think one of the things I took away from that was that it isn't just the benefit cap analysis, it's the benefit cap analysis combined with the work we've done with you on household incomes and expenditure, and putting the whole picture together. That I think is some of what you found particularly helpful. There are I think we've got time for two quick questions before the hour's up. Asha, if you're, perhaps I'll have to have a go at answering these. I think she's just jumped off.
Yeah.
No, you're still there. Fantastic. Which was just to ask you, one of the questions is, have you been working with housing associations?
Tricky and difficult because we don't have the data as much as we'd like to. But what we try to do is with the RSLs that were already showing us rent arrears, letters that we'd received, or customers contacting us, we've included those. We've kind of matched our Eclipse records with our BenCap records, and it's been a very manual exercise to kind of work that through. But I'll be very honest with you, this time CHAs have been very quiet in Croydon. I think because I don't think they've really hit the first cap. I think the ones that will be hit for the very first time in December is when we will start seeing HAs kind of engaging with us. But at the moment, we haven't really seen that.
It will be when the rent is due, I think is what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is a shame in some ways. I think being proactive, if you're a housing association on the call, being proactive about it can be powerful. It's worked well where you have a particularly strong relationship and most of your properties in one particular local authority. We've even had housing associations kind of fund the analysis in order for them to get hold of the data in places like Walsall and Newcastle because they recognised that in order to protect their rents in future.
I guess from the housing association's perspective this time, for the ones who are going to be capped further, we haven't seen that many cases in Croydon. We're talking about probably 62 cases who are housing associations who we've identified are in rent arrears already through our manual exercise, but we haven't really had anything more come back. But that has been tedious because we've had to go through each and every claim on Eclipse to find if there were any rent arrears recorded or no.
Okay. I mean, I think that's another sense of perhaps how within an authority spending a lot of time going through the data yourself can be quite challenging. But perhaps given that there's an approach at policy and practice that could be scaled out across other local authorities, that's something we're very keen to do. I don't think we've got time for any more questions because I do want to wrap up before 11:30 because that's what we said we would do. I think the only other question that's come up from Stephen is asking where they have moved to, and I think it'd be great perhaps after this to share your map of doom, Asha, because I think
yes, absolutely. It's not in your borough, Steve. Don't worry.
moving people out of London is getting much trickier because the cap just outside of London is so much lower. So
yes, absolutely.
A real challenge. Not that that's what households tend to want to do anyway, but just the next steps. Feel free to send follow-up questions. Continue to engage with us. Contact details are on the next slide. But once I end the webinar, you'll receive an automated survey. It's always helpful to know whether or not the information we delivered was useful to you. You can book a call with us to talk to us more about this analysis and how it might be able to help your local authority. There are a couple of resources that you can access for free, so you can request our benefit cap white paper. You might also be interested in the case study of the work we did with Your Homes Newcastle. And you can join our newsletter mailing list to stay updated on our work, particularly with so many of you, so many new authorities on the call. Okay, thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it. Asha, I'm really glad you were able to join us at the end. Thank you so much. And
okay, take care.
Without further ado, our contact details are here, and I'll be ending the webinar now. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.